Chapter 14. I came to Eagle Island at 7 the next morning, just as faint light showed on the horizon. It was 53 degrees below zero with a sharp wind blowing out of the north. The marshal said that it was warmer at Kaltag, the next checkpoint, so I went on for an hour, made camp, fed the dogs, and ate 2 chunks of muktuk. The whale fat and skin have a good flavor, but take a lot of chewing. I got everything out of the sled, crawled into my sleeping bag, pulled the sled cover over myself, and set an alarm clock for noon. Oteg woke me before noon. He came creeping into camp with 3 injured dogs and his leader dead. 2 of the dogs he carried in a basket, and 1 limped along behind him. The rest of the team looked beaten. Oteg, too. He had a bloody cut across his chin, and 1 of his hands was bandaged. I got out of my sleeping bag as fast as I could. "Moose," he said before I could ask him what had happened. "Oteg is lucky man to be alive. I saw 3 of them sooner than I left Grayling. By the cave, yes. I saw 3 moose grazing close around the cave, but it was a good place. I saw a candy wrapper and knew you had camped there. A litter bug. I went to sleep. When I woke up, one of the moose was standing right over me, started with its red streaked eyes. I did not move. I barely took a breath. The moose walked away a few steps. My gun was in the sled, 10 or 12 feet away. I did not get up. I rolled a little towards the sled. The moose walked back and stood over me again. A terrible thought came to me. I was going to die. There in the snow, killed by a moose. Oteg had a hand wrapped in a piece of dirty cloth. His fingers, which stuck out, had turned blue in the cold. He tried to get a mitten on his hand, but it wouldn't fit over the bandage. He used his teeth and bit through the bandage and put the mitten on. The moose hung over me, Oteg said. His lumpy snout hung down close to my face. I feared he was going to stay there until I froze to death. Then he grunted and walked off. Not far. He kept watching. Another moose came up, and both of them watched me. Then they went over to where the team was staked out. The dogs were barking and trying to pull up their stakes. I lay very quiet. The beast quit watching. They were curious about the dogs. I crawled out to the sled and found the gun. It was in a bag, and it took me a while to get it out. My leader had pulled out his stake. He was between the 2 moose. I heard a terrible sound. He was moaning. A sharp hoof had slit his throat. The other dogs were staked down, but they were trying to fight off the 2 moose. My first bullet struck an antler and whizzed back close to my head. The second bullet struck one of the moose square in the heart. The other moose came at me. The third bullet stopped him. "I'll take your injured dogs to Kaltag. You will lose time. I will take time." I made room for the dead leader and the 3 injured dogs and covered them with the sleeping bag. Oteg said, "Leave them at Kaltag and do not wait for me. You're in a race." My team was anxious to go. Black Star was lunging at his harness. I hung back, hating to leave my friend. Oteg said again, "Do not wait. This is time to go fast." I shouted, "Hike!" and pushed the sled. Black Star lunged away. I looked back. The light from Oteg's lamp grew faint and faded away. A half an hour after midnight, I got to Kaltag. After I checked in, I gave Oteg's dogs to the veterinarian. They were not seriously hurt, he told me, but they couldn't pull a sled. The dead leader we buried. Word had come from Mr. Wise in Ikuma. He had sent in a day by radio to the marshal at Kaltag. Mr. Wise, the marshal told me, said that the town of Ikuma asked God to speed you on your victory." "Victory?" I exclaimed. "Is that what Mr. Wise said?" "That's what he said, victory. I heard it clearly." In less than an hour, I was back on the sled. I found a place to camp and slept until dawn. Snow was falling. There were no dogs in sight when I woke up, only little round holes. They were buried in the snow and were breathing through the holes, and I went back to sleep until 10 that morning. At noon, 8 drivers left Kaltag in staggered order. In the lead was a girl I had talked to in Shangiluk, who had advised me not to stand around at the checkpoints and jabber. Despite everything, I was running ninth. A wind came up and drove the snow. Black Star forced the team to fight it. We moved through half darkness all day. At 4 the next morning, I camped off the trail in a small meadow protected by a ring of spruce trees. Wind roared through the top of the trees, though it was quiet and peaceful on the ground. I stalked out the dogs, all except Black Star, who curled up at my feet. Staked out the dogs, all except Black Star, who curled up at my feet beside the fire I had built. I dozed for a while and woke up to strange sounds. It wasn't the wind. I had heard the sounds before, but now it was dawn. Orange and green lights streaked down through the trees. I made out a wolf pack standing at the edge of the meadow. The leader took a few cautious steps towards the fire, then turned away. But before he disappeared, I had a very clear picture of him. For the brief glimpse I had him, all I knew about him was his color. In the dawn light, I saw that his body was exactly the same pure white as Black Star's. Their faces were the same also. Icy blue eyes with slanted up in the corners. Shadowy, fox-like masks around the slanted eyes, the black star-like blaze on the forehead. The only difference between the dogs was that Black Star was younger by 3 or 4 years. Yet surely they came from the same family. I remember that Black Star's father was brought to our village by a trapper from Baffin Bay and mated to a Siberian husky. Suddenly it struck me that Black Star was the son of this wolf. As the leader moved away from us, my dogs yelped at his heels. Black Star did not move, but his ears were perked up. His body was tense, and the gaze followed the white wolf. Something had passed between them. A scent, a look, a sound I had not heard. I needed sleep, 2 hours at least. I took my time and tied Black Star securely to the sled and then got into the sled in my sleeping bag. I slept longer than I had planned and woke up covered with a blanket of ice. The snow had stopped, but the wind still roared. I took hold of Black Star's rope and shouted, "Let's go!" The rope came loose in my hand. The end was ragged. It had been gnawed through. Black Star was gone. I jumped off the sled and cast a wild look around the meadow. It shimmered in the morning light. Footprints were everywhere. About the sled, the meadow, out in the meadow, to the trail. Black Star and 6 of my team were nowhere in sight, but their tracks showed clear. They led north toward Ikuma and Nome. Stunned, I harnessed the 6 dogs left to me. There was a chance, a small chance, that I could overtake my fleeing dogs, running with the wolves. They would travel at a slow pace, hunting for food. Possibly once the urge to join his father had been satisfied, Black Star would return. What the other dogs, the ones Mr. Wise had purchased, would do, I didn't know. The sun was lost in the bank of summer clouds. The clouds broke up into horsetails. The wind shifted into the east, and heavy winds struck us. The dogs struggled against it, but we hadn't gone far. Without Black Star to lead us, when they turned their backs to the wind and curled up in the snow. With some effort, I got them off the trail and into a stand of trees. I built a fire, fed them, and changed their boots. I ate the last of my ice cream and lay down by the fire. I dozed for an hour and woke to find Black Star stretched out beside me, fast asleep. He always slept with one eye open, so in a movement he raised up and rubbed his cold nose against mine to beg my pardon for his absence. Then he curled up again. Chapter 15. The next checkpoint was Ikuma. My things were strewn about on the sled, thrown in any old way. I took time and put everything in order. I changed my clothes from the skin out and put on sealskin pants and my best parka and the parka cover I had made of red cotton cloth. It had a flowery print of roses and looked like a summer dress. It matched the ribbon on the dog's boots and the ribbon in my hair. Now, when I drove down Main Street, I would not be taken for a derelict. Now I felt like a racer. Black Star did too. He kept pointing his nose towards the north, lunging at the tow line. But there was one very bad thing. I had left Ikuma 2 weeks earlier with 14 dogs. Now I had only 7. A bitter wind sprang up. It didn't come out of the sky. The sky was clear. It came sneaking along the trail in angry gusts, driving icy arrows before it. I couldn't see through my goggles, so I took them off. The dogs bowed their heads against the arrows. The sleet piled up and hid the trail. I walked out in front of Black Star to help him find the way. When the arrow began to unravel the dog's boots in an hour of travel, I stopped 3 times to take off torn boots and tie on new ones. Yet, as the storm ended, one of my dogs was lame, and I had to put him on the sleigh. I also had to change all their boots and clean the ice balls from their ears and eyes. With myself, there was nothing I could do. The parka cover was still in one piece, but it no longer looked like a summery dress. My hair was matted. My face was all in spots and windburnt. Felt like a mask made of wood, ironwood. But I couldn't lose more time. Now I was driving a team of only 6 dogs. Faintly in the distance, I saw a golden glow. Ikuma calls itself a town, but it's really a village and has no streetlights. Yet the glow came from there. The glow grew brighter. Then, as dawn came, it disappeared, and I saw blue smoke rising from the hills beside the village. They had built a bonfire to guide me during the night. We went into Ikuma at a slow trot. Black Star strained at his harness and wanted to go faster, but the dogs behind him were tired. The whole village was gathered on Main Street, which was 2 blocks long. The people were in the middle of the street. They formed a lane that was just wide enough for us to get through. It was like driving through a tunnel. My friends touched me as I went by. My schoolmates shouted my name. Amelia, Yux, Sadie, Tellen ran out and kissed me. At the end of the tunnel, Mr. Wise and Mr. Gibson were waiting. They stretched out their arms, but before I reached them, my father rushed out. He lifted me off the sleigh and hugged me until I could scarcely breathe. My mother waited behind him. She was crying with happiness. Tears ran down her red cheeks. She had been cooking for a long time, getting food ready for me. The town had built a platform in front of the Empire Cafe and draped it with flags and clusters of balloons. The school band was playing God Bless America with all of its might. Mr. Wise and Mr. Gibson stepped up on the platform with their wives, who wore ribbons across their chests that read Bright Dawn in large letters. I was too tired to enjoy the excitement. I almost forgot to check in. My father helped me up to the platform ladder and went off to see about the dogs. I needed to lie down and sleep. Mr. Wise gave a speech, and I had to listen, or at least look as though I were listening. Then he asked me to give a speech. I don't remember the speech. I believe I said thanks several times, and that was my speech. A crowd had gathered around the sled. They were petting the dogs, feeding them hamburgers and candy. The crowd followed me home, running along and singing beside the sled. My mother had cooked a huge meal of fish soup and roast turkey, ptarmigan, and sourdough bread. I ate some of it just to please her. Then I fell into bed and slept for 3 hours and dreamed that I was back in the cave with the wolves. When I woke up, Mr. Gibson and Mr. Wise were talking to my father. She has only 7 dogs left, my father said. Bad, Frank Gibson said. Bad. And Blizzard has a crack in one of his forepaws. He can drop out any time, my father said. Mr. Wise was troubled. With a long way to go, Frank Gibson was pacing the floor, pulling at his pointed beard, the crack an inch long. He said, the dog won't last another day. I was not troubled about Blizzard. He was a loafer, but tough. He would never give up. I drifted back to sleep. The wind woke me up. It was thrashing against the house, making weird sounds in the trees. It had blown the snow from the window, and I could see Mr. Gibson and Mr. Wise outside walking among the dogs. My mother said, it is foolish for you to go in this storm. Not one driver is gone. I have watched. My father got me on my feet. Now is the time. Like your mother said, not one driver has left town. Not even the leader, as far as I know, has left. They're asleep and will sleep until daybreak. By then, you'll be far out of their trail. Mr. Wise and Mr. Gibson had come in, were warming themselves by the stove. They were covered with sleet. I agree with your father, Mr. Wise said. Now is time to go. This is the break, Frank Gibson said. A big break, my father said. My mother was making thick caribou sandwiches for me to take. Mr. Wise said, how do you feel, my girl? He laughed and was very happy. Frank Gibson had quit pulling at his pointed beard. He was happy too. You look fine, Mr. Wise said. How do you feel? I was still asleep. Fine, I said. My voice sounded like someone else's voice. The team is ready to go, Frank Gibson said. We fed them fish snacks, looked at their boots, put salve on Blizzard's paw, and wrapped it up. They're raring to go, Mr. Wise said. This wasn't true. When I pulled up, the snow anchor stranded the runners and shouted, hike! Black Star was slow to move. He turned his head against the driving wind and started off, crabwise. The sky was black. The wind blew harsh and steady. I went against it, zigzagging down Main Street, which was deserted. But there was something odd about the way the team pulled. I stopped the team and went out along the tow line. Nothing was wrong with Black Star. He just didn't like the wind. I patted Blizzard on the head and rumpled his ears. He was all right. Moon was all right too, but next to her was a new dog. The dog's body was white and it had a dark spot on its face. I recognized it as a dog that belonged to Frank Gibson. He had put my team number on it and painted a slash mark on its back. The dog was meant to be substitute for Blizzard if Blizzard had to quit the race. A fresh dog would be a big help. Now that I was down to 7 and one of them lame, but I didn't wrestle with my conscience. To add a dog to a team anywhere on the trail was against the rules. It took me a long time to get Frank Gibson's dog unhitched and tied to a door on the Empire Cafe. The blizzard was blowing stronger than before. It was hard to see. A woman ran out of her house and gave me a snack of food. I didn't know who she was. Good luck, she called out. I was tempted to go home and wait for daylight. At the checkpoint, the racer judge advised me not to leave. You'll not get far, he said. It's 20 below here in the cabin, and the wind's blowing at 10. That makes the temperature somewhere close to 30 below. It was much cooler at Kaltag, I said. You can lose a finger or two, or a hand, a foot, or maybe your life, the judge said. He was doing his best to discourage me. I used to live near here at Womengo. I know the country. If you can't see it, how will you know where you are? My lead dog will know, I said. We headed into the storm. Black Star would go a few steps and stop. I got off the runner and walked beside him. But he didn't want to go faster. Finally, I went out in front of him. Traveling this way, we made only 2 miles in an hour, which was very slow. My breath froze as soon as it left my lips. Before dawn, I stopped and fed the dogs a hot meal from the cooker. I ate 3 sandwiches my mother had made and some of the bag of pizzi, the dried fish that the women who ran out in the storm had given me. I needed to sleep at least for an hour, and as did the dogs. We were blocking the trail, and though there was little chance that any of the drivers would come along before daylight, I thought it best to camp. By chance, I found a path that led off the trail. It was marked by fresh tracks, so many and so mixed up that I wasn't sure what animals had made them. They could be the tracks of a fox, wolverines, or even wolves. At the end of the path was a deserted cabin. Its walls stood, but the roof had fallen in. Over the doors hung a locked horns of 2 caribou bulls that had fought and died in battle. In my headlamp, they shone a ghostly white. I staked the dogs close to the porch and made a fire in rusty iron drums out of wood that was lying about. The cabin door fell off when I opened it, and this I added to the fire. After I had warmed myself a little, I put my sleeping bag inside the doorway out of the storm and set the clock ticking in my head for an hour of daybreak and lay down to sleep. I had not closed my eyes when a wolf came to the doorway, hesitated for a moment, then leaped over my body and crossed the room. In the glow from the fire, I saw a nest of puppies lying in the corner. I watched while she chewed up a snow rabbit and fed them. Wolves, if they aren't in danger, can be friendly, more affectionate than dogs. Yet she was a member of a pack that might return at any time and cause trouble. She might even belong to a wolf pack that had followed us, though I doubted it. Fighting sleep and bitter cold, I thought about what I should do. The wolf's eyes glowed yellow in the firelight. While she nursed her pups, she watched me. Overcome by sleep, I must have dozed, for what I saw her next, she was sniffing at my hood. I lied still and spoke to her in a wolf talk I used with Black Star. She answered me in the same tone. The tones rose and fell. They were wild, not even close to being human, yet as clear to me as spoken words. She had accepted me. She trusted me not to harm her pups. With one leap, she disappeared through the doorway. Chapter 16. I went to sleep. My clock awakened me exactly at 30 minutes past 3. The cabin was dark. I put on my headlamp and went outside. I tied a new harness on Black Star, changed boots on all the dogs, and started off. The trail had a light covering of snow over ice, which made the sled easier to pull. The storm ended slowly as we left the checkpoint at Unalakleet, and warm south winds sprang up. I began to nod. I pushed back my hood and untied my hair, but I still felt drowsy. I got off the sled and ran behind the dogs. They were going too fast for me, so I got back on the sled. I recited a poem I had learned at school, and I counted backwards, starting from 1,000. It happened when I reached number 465. We were going through a spruce grove. A branch I didn't see struck me across the face and knocked me off the sled. The fall woke me up in time to shout, "Whoa!" before the team disappeared. I had a cut on my nose and a bad headache. After that, I didn't feel drowsy at all. At Shaktoolik, the next checkpoint, the trail crossed Norton Sound to the checkpoint of Kayuk. I knew this treacherous stretch of sea ice. It was here that my father had nearly lost his life. The blizzard blew away during the night, but as I got ready to leave, the headlands of the icy stretch of the sound had disappeared. I couldn't see in any direction. I could scarcely see my own feet. A heavy white mist, like shredded cotton, had drifted in during the night and blotted out the world. The 3 other drivers at Shaktoolik waited for the sun to come up. They thought that they would burn away in the mist. I knew better. Whiteouts could last for days. I was now running third behind the girl from Willow Creek. We were less than 200 miles from Nome. This was my big chance to catch her. I fed the dogs, changed their boots, and drove away an hour before dawn. The ice was covered with a thin snow, which made the sled easy to pull. The dogs were in high spirits. Their bushy tails curled over their backs, and they wanted to go fast. But I held them back. It was a long way across Norton Sound. After daybreak, the air began to glitter like a diamond. White shadows swirled around us. 1 minute, they were houses in a big village, then bare cliffs, then sailing boats on the sea, then trees and snowy mountains. I got dizzy watching them come and fade out, so I stopped and camped for an hour. When we started up again and had gone about 2 miles, Black Star came to a halt and set his legs as if he came to a cliff. I got off the sled and went out to see what was wrong. As far as I could tell, the trail had not changed, so I walked for a few steps to make sure that we were not headed for a crack in the ice or open water. Black Star wouldn't have stopped had he not felt danger of some sort. He could smell danger half a mile away. I had walked ahead further than I thought, and when I turned back, I couldn't find my footsteps. The trail I had followed only a moment before had disappeared. I stopped dead still. I faced in what I thought was the direction that I had come from. It seemed wrong. When I faced in the opposite direction towards the coast of Kayuk, but this also seemed wrong. There was nothing to see except swirling curtains of white cotton. There was no sky above me, no ice beneath my feet. An awful thought seized me. It took my breath away. I was lost. I had learned that the first thing to do if you are lost in a whiteout is to be calm. I had heard this from many hunters. In childhood, I had heard it from my father. Calm yourself, he had said, and do not move. In an hour or 2, the whiteout will go away, and you are alive. You have not wandered off and fallen through a hole in the ice. I listened for the dogs barking. All I heard was a loud silence. Threads of cotton were pressing against my eyes. It was hard to breathe. I sat down, put my ears against the ice. Sometimes you can hear noise from far off this way. I hoped that drivers might be coming from Shaktoolik. I listened until my ear was numb. I heard nothing. After an hour or so, I heard a drowning sound high above me. The sound grew louder and slowly died away. It could have been the plane that carried mail between Nome and Anchorage. When I lived in Womengo, it went over our house 3 times every week. If it was the mail plane, what direction was it flying? northeast to Nome or southwest to Anchorage. I couldn't tell which by just the sound. I sat down on the ice and waited for one of the drivers to come by. My sled blocked the trail. The drivers would have to go around it, and my dogs would surely bark. They couldn't be more than 100 feet away, but in what direction? I didn't dare move, lest I wander off and go deeper into the swirling mist. The sun was somewhere overhead when Black Star began to bark. I heard no sound, and another team, probably the race, was frozen because of the whiteout, as it had been frozen in Rainy Pass because of the blizzard. The barking kept up. I was close, yet it came from all directions at once. I cupped my hands and shouted. My voice struck an icy wall and bounced back at me. There was a short silence, then suddenly, as though they were floating in a white wave, Black Star and my team appeared. I grasped the handlebar as he swung the sled around and started for the trail. When he came to the trail, he didn't stop. As he had before, he turned back towards Shaktoolik. I shouted at him and tried my best to turn him around to the checkpoint at Kayuk, but Black Star had sensed a danger in that direction. It could only be open water. The ice had broke up and destroyed the trail. He was fleeing from danger. He went fast, his nose close to the trail. He had not gone far when again he stopped suddenly. Again the team piled up on him. I straightened them out as I picked my way forward to where he stood. His front feet were set, his head was raised high, and he was sniffing the air, turning from side to side. I had brought a rope which I tied to the tow line. I went forward cautiously, holding the end of the rope. Determined that I would not get lost a second time, the trail in front of me had changed. It reared up on one way, then another. I slipped and fell to my knees. My headlamp went out. A few steps beyond the trail came to an end. Beyond its jagged edges, I saw deep water through the mist. I had been cut off. I was on an island of drifting ice. I couldn't move. I stood and gazed at the icy water. Through rents in the mist, I saw that the opening was about 5 feet wide. I could easily leap that distance, and the dogs could also. But where would we be jumping? Was it another island adrift like the one that we were on? I tied the rope tightly around my waist. Hand over hand, I found my way back to my dogs. They were sitting calmly on their haunches, waiting to be fed, except for Black Star. He had his head raised and was sniffing the air. He sensed danger as much as I did. For a while, I forgot the danger. I built a fire and cooked the dogs a hot meal and lumbered and fish. At dusk, the whiteout began to break and the creepy shadows slowly disappeared. When night came, scattered lights showed along the coast from the village of Womengo and Koyuk, but I couldn't tell whether we were drifting towards them or eastward into the vast Bering Sea. The night grew cold. There was no wood for fire, and I dared not use the fuel I had for the cooker. On both sides of us rose lofty ewanuks. I found a place among them that gave us shelter from the wind. Around midnight, the coast was a dark line of the horizon. Still, I could not tell where we were drifting or whether we were drifting at all. A short time later, I saw in the distance the light from a headlamp bobbling along. As it drew closer, I recognized the powerful beam and the greenish glow. It was a special headlamp. It belonged to a girl from Willow Creek. Her light was steady. She had not come to the break in the ice. I tried to make my broken headlamp work. to signal her that I was in distress, but I couldn't get the wires together in the dark. I heard her steel runners skimming the ice. She was not far away and running fast. My dogs were silent. I don't know why. I cupped my hands and I shouted into the darkness, but the wind was blowing against me and carried my voice away. She did not answer. Suddenly, she was running slower. She had seen open water and been cautious. When I heard a whip crack and her team ran fast again, the break in the ice had not destroyed the trail. She was safe on the far side of the water, headed for Koyuk. The greenish light from her headlamp grew smaller and disappeared in the darkness. I had lost my lead in the race. Soon after, a stream of headlamps poured down the trail and disappeared. I counted 30 of them. It didn't seem to matter. As the ice rocketed to the movement of the waves and the wind moaned among the Eownuks, I was in danger of losing my life.